Kim and I are going to discuss Nosferatu, the 2024, this year Nosferatu, not the, what was it, 1920, 1922,
Yes.
in that
Now,
era.
question, is it Nosferatu or Nosferatu?
I don't know. What do you think? I
I
could be completely
well,
saying
because
it
I say
incorrectly.
Nosferatu, and you
You're
said
probably,
Nosferatu, and I just don't know. And I don't know if it
you're,
matters.
I think you're more correct because I feel like in the film we just watched, they say
Yeah,
Nosferatu
I
more
think they
frequently.
did.
At least Willem Dafoe does, as I recall.
Yeah.
Um,
Not that it matters. It was just an observation.
no, yeah. So we saw it today. It's Robert Eggers' newest film. I generally like his movies. I mean, we've kind of talked about this, just you and I having a discussion before.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, it's kind of up in the air, but I would say The Northman is my favorite of his movies. We'll get to Nosferatu, not Nosferatu, in a minute, but I like The Northman a lot. The Witch, I was kind of like a little bit on that. Didn't necessarily love it. The
No,
Lighthouse is just a super strange movie, but it's beautifully
not
filmed.
interested. Yeah.
But consistently, I think across all of his movies, the imagery and the visuals are always really great, and I think that's the case here
Yeah.
as well. So, what is your Robert Eggers director experience prior to this?
So I saw The Witch years ago, when sort of around the time it came out, because there was a lot of hype and buzz, and I hated it. Like, Matt and I very much after watching that movie would make fun of it because
Yeah,
there's a line where it's like, "Do you like the taste of butter?" that the goat says to the girl, and we're like, "That's how you get in with the devil is butter?" I don't know. It just for us, it just no. I didn't like it. I did not see the lighthouse because I knew it was weird and I wasn't interested. And I heard good things about the Northman from a lot of people. And then when I knew that we were going to see Nosferatu, I watched The Northman probably in the last few weeks, and I
yeah,
did really like it. And I'm glad I watched it because it gave me a sense of what his style was going to be. And I will say, I'm not big into like Viking fantasy type film. I mean, I'll watch them, but they're not my favorite genre. But I liked a lot of the supernatural elements that he put in the film. To me, it gave it a layer that made it more than just some Viking fantasy film. So
yeah.
I might agree that The Northman might be my favorite of his. I feel like I'd have to watch The Northman and Nosferatu again, or at least maybe watch The Northman again to officially decide.
Yeah, so I guess before we jump into this, a super quick plot summary, which, and actually, I'll put an info card in this video when I upload it. But we reviewed again the original Nosferatu. This is pretty darn close to that in
Yeah,
terms of the
yeah, it really
plot,
is.
but there are some deviations here and there. But basically, this is the Count Dracula story kind of reimagined, more or less, right? So
Yeah.
living in they don't say Transylvania, but on the map in the movie when they're
Yes.
looking at the area, it's clearly there. So basically, this real estate broker has to go from, I presume it's in England somewhere. I don't know if
No,
they
they're in
ever.
Germany. They're in
Germany,
Germany.
that's right. That's right. They say Germany, and I can't remember the name of the actual town that they mentioned in the movie. It's like
Pittsburgh,
Pittsburgh.
something like that.
Yeah, I kept thinking they were saying Pittsburgh. I was like, it is not Pittsburgh,
No,
Pennsylvania. But anyway, he
no.
has to make this multi-country trek to get there. And as he's getting closer, he starts to feel kind of ill, and there's all these omens, especially when it's closer to the actual castle where Count Orlok, who is the person who's going to move, lives. There's these locals who are kind of steeped in superstition because they're scared of his castle and what he represents. But
Yes.
also in the background is Lily Rose Depp's character, who is Hutter. I believe his name was Hutter, the
Yeah.
main guy. His new wife, who has kind of a long history of, I don't know what the best way to describe this would be, but she's kind of a conduit for otherworldly things.
Yeah.
Sort of. Is that
Yeah.
how you would describe it? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's how Willem Dafoe's character sort of describes her, is that she was born into this connection with the occult and he
Yeah.
just studied it. And that's why she's more entrenched in it than he is.
Yeah, so Hutter arrives, and right off the bat, you can see something is clearly amiss with Orlok. I mean, he's talking in a very kind of archaic tongue at times. It's a little bit difficult to understand him. He's sort of veiled in shadow all the time, and as viewers, we don't really get to see his face fully until kind of a pivotal moment in the film where Hutter is really starting to go over the edge, and he finds Orlok's coffin, right? Which is sort of
Yeah,
the Dracula vampire motif kind of stuff. But that's where we see his face, and we'll talk about sort of the visuals and I think how they represented him here, which works. Some parts work well, some parts for me did not work as well when it
yeah,
comes to Orlok specifically. But eventually, this all kind of carries the action back toward this town in Germany where there's kind of a plague, but the plague is directly tied to Orlok and
yeah.
rats. And again, it's very similar to the actual original movie in the way that it all kind of unfolds. But again, it's sort of a, I don't know, a retelling of the Count
Yeah.
Dracula novel, basically.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I'm not gonna watch the original Nosferatu again. I've seen it multiple
I'm
times
not,
at this point in my life.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so I, watched it in film school, watched it for our review. And but what from what I remember, it seemed like when Hutter first got to the castle with Orlok, he already had a hint of superstitions. Like people had already warned him about it, but he didn't seem overly suspicious of Orlok in the beginning. Whereas in this telling, immediately he's like, I don't want to be here. Like, this guy is. And they do a nice job with the action of he's very slow moving, but then there are these quick cuts where he's pouring a glass of wine, but then suddenly he's over by the fire. And so I think it does a nice job of establishing this sort of supernatural presence that would make someone in that scene feel uncomfortable.
well, and I'm looking at the notes that I sort of jotted down here, and I think one of the things that the movie does really well visually, and to me, that's the strongest part of the whole thing, are just the visuals and the way it's shot and the photography and everything. But the use of shadow and how Orlok sort of is a
Yes.
tangible threat as a shadow, like it's sort of a fake out a
Yes.
lot of times where you see his hand reaching out or his silhouette, and then he's in one other place, but he can use his shadow to actually control things. But yeah, the quick cuts, all of that kind of stuff, where he's appearing behind people and all of that is super creepy. So here's what I'm going to do. I posted my 2 sentence review on Letterboxd of this. I'm just going to read my 2 sentence review, and
Okay.
I think we have different takes on this a little bit, not
Okay.
drastically different, but I'm just going to read it, and then you can, if you have like a 2 sentence review. But speaking of Letterboxd, I've been trying to get Kim on there. I think it is a really cool way to like share movie reviews, kind of in a social media format. But if anybody's on Letterboxd and you want to follow me on there. I'll put my stuff in the description for that. But anyway, let me just read my review for it. So I wrote, visually, the film is mesmerizing. When the meticulously curated veil is pulled back, though, we're mostly left with the same old vampire fare that has been regurgitated onto celluloid time and again since, well, the original Nosferatu. So, so that's my take. Is visually it's awesome, but narratively, like there's nothing new under the sun. Like that's kind of my. Now I will say, in between all that is great acting. There is some really good acting, so that
Yeah.
shouldn't be ignored at all. But so, what's your kind of 2 cent or 2 cent quick take on the whole thing?
I agree with 90% of that statement. I think the
Okay,
5% is I do feel like while narratively it's the same sort of vampire story, and I don't I don't believe it was trying to be different, a different vampire story. It wasn't trying to be Edward Cullen. They don't sparkle in sunlight, and I appreciate that. It was a true vampire story. What I found compelling were, I guess, was honestly Ellen Hutter, and we talked a little bit about this, her possession, and
right,
and ultimately Nosferatu's figure, and just sort of the grotesque nature and the physicality and the body horror, really, that gets involved. And in a lot of ways, because it's not 1922, it's 2024, they could sexualize more of that, which makes it even more disturbing that
yeah.
you have to start sexualizing this very grotesque being. Honestly, it gave me some Substance vibes at some
So
time.
I was just about to say the same thing as far
Yeah.
as like, are we in this like kind of golden period of body horror between the
I
substance
mean,
and,
I'm not mad
that? Like, I
about it.
don't
I hope
know.
we are. Like, that is because as a woman, I will make a social commentary on like, there is a lot of body horror that I experience every day just existing. And so I'm happy to kind of see that it, analyzed and explored in cinema. So yes, it was the same vampire story. There's nothing new or unique about that. But I think how the other characters got to react and experience that story was a little bit different and more unique, and that's the part I think I appreciated the most.
That's so to me, the biggest question I have anytime there's a remake of something, like the remake of Psycho or whatever, is like, why? Like,
Why
right?
is a great question.
If are we doing something that's measurably different here? And I think you're right that there are some beats that are different enough to warrant it, and I think visually, obviously, it's just given a whole new, and I don't want to say a sheen because there is sort of a gothic
Yeah,
grittiness to the whole thing, which is what it's supposed to be. Because it's set in
yeah,
1838 or whatever year it is. um, I think it does justify its existence, which again is a question I ask with any remake, but
yeah,
for me, just barely, like just barely. Not to say
yeah.
that the original movie, couldn't use a little bit of an update for a modern audience, but I still really appreciate the original movie for what it is and what it kind of pioneered. It holds up remarkably well, especially for a silent film. Just all these 100 years later.
No, it absolutely does, and I think it's funny because I don't know that I've ever been able to articulate that perspective when because I get so annoyed with remakes because I ask myself that why did you
Yeah,
have to do this? But I don't know that I ever look at them through that lens of okay, why did they do this? What was their goal? And I again I don't think for this one it was to tell it in a different narrative, but I think through a different visual element that would maybe appeal more somewhat in 2024. I don't even know because I don't know that most 2024 audiences do want that level of cinematography.
yeah. It's. I mean, I would say and I maybe there's a Robert Eggers movie I haven't seen. I think I've seen all of them, but maybe not. But I think this is probably his most quote unquote mainstream movie. Maybe I
Yeah,
don't know
I
though.
would,
The Northman. The Northman is a very I don't know. I mean, it's pretty digestible from a box office perspective, but this one I think has a
yeah,
very tidy conclusion to it,
yes.
which I don't know if
And
that's good or bad,
people
but
know what
yeah,
to expect. They know it's going to be a
yeah.
traditional vampire narrative, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Now what? And I will tell you. So on Letterboxd, I gave it 3 out of 5. That was my star rating. I almost
I
did
would do
three and a
that.
half, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, it doesn't do enough new for me to warrant pushing it like that far ahead. So I mean, we don't usually do like number ratings, but what would you
Right.
give it out of 5? Like if you were kind of thinking about it.
So I do feel like I would be in this 2.5 to 3, like out of 5 stars, because I still liked it more than I thought I would, but I went in with like no expectations, and so I just
Yeah.
kind of let it be. And so there were parts that definitely surprised me, but also admittedly, and I said this to someone after the film, I was like, yeah, my mind wandered a lot during that movie. Like,
I got
yeah,
shockingly. I don't know if bored is the right word, but I was like, I don't know, like it stretched itself a little bit longer than maybe it
yes.
needed to. I don't know.
And I don't even know length because by the third act there was enough happening that I didn't I knew we were coming to the end. I do think kind of setting the 3 nights is a nice structure for an audience because now I know okay,
Oh.
well, I can count down till this is over, which I appreciate because there are such long lingering moments early in the film when they're establishing a lot of the cinematic, tableaus, but I found there were a lot of times where I was like, "La, la, 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 what are we gonna do this
The
week?" and things like that.
Well, and I think I told you when we were walking out of the theater, like again, visually, I love all of his movies, and this is no different than that. I just thought it really nailed sort of the gothic vibe, but I could not help for some, and I know there are big differences, but I kept thinking like I would rather watch Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Coppola Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I think is also really visually interesting and has a great Gary Oldman Dracula performance kind of at the center of it. And there's actually a little more character development in that movie, but I don't know. That's just kind of
I mean,
that was
I
sort of
would
my
rather
take
watch
from it.
Twilight if it was like
I'm not
if it
sure I
was
would go that far for me. But I don't think I've ever
you can
actually
watch
seen
Twilight or
I've
the
never
new
watched it. I've never
Nosferatu.
watched Twilight, so I guess I can't really say that with
No,
any
and you
confidence.
shouldn't, and I don't
Okay.
think that that's something you should do. Um, don't do that. But I just because when thinking about vampire films that we're engaged in and interested in, I watch the Twilight movies a lot.
So let me ask you this. This is kind of a tangent. I hadn't even planned on this question being a part of what we're doing here, but what is your favorite vampire movie? Like if you just had to pick one
Mm,
vampire movie.
well, and I never would have thought this, but for like the first one that comes to mind is From Dusk Till Dawn.
Oh, I
Because
love that
ever
movie.
since you introduced that movie to me, I love it. I
It's
love
good.
that movie. And mostly because I love George Clooney in that movie, because I don't like George Clooney. He's not my jam. But in that movie, as a tattooed, badass murdering, that's going in a, it's a
Yeah.
weird, that's not my type.
Yeah.
But I like him in that.
Well, and Quentin Tarantino is such a psycho in that movie. Like his character, it's just
Oh my god,
it's
yes. In
nuts.
such an adorable way. Like, what
Yeah.
a cute little psycho. Oh, I
I
love
almost now that you're bringing that up, that is probably near the top of my list. So I would say it's either going to be Dracula, the one I just mentioned, or I really like Interview with the Vampire, like Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. I like that one a lot, but
I
I know that's not for everybody necessarily.
I do like that movie. I rewatched it somewhat recently and found parts that I was like, "Oh, I don't remember this part feeling so slow."
Okay.
One of the first
Yeah.
times I watched it, but it is overall a really solid film.
Well, and I can't forget Blade. Have you ever
Blade is a good one.
Blade's a
Blade,
solid one. I mean, it's just pure
Blade.
action
Well,
camp
and that's why there's
frequently,
so
but
many different types of vampire movies. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but that's why I like the Santa Claus movie. Like I like movies that take the traditional lore and twist it and do something different with it, because I think why not? Be creative.
yeah,
Give us a new bend. I didn't expect this Nosferatu to do that though. I didn't want it to
yeah.
do that. If it had made some weird claim about something different, I think I would have been more upset, because I don't need it to do that. The original is so old that remaking it now, I understand, might be more for like a cinematic visual purpose. If this was a movie that was made 30 years ago and now you're remaking it, then yeah, you got to do something different. Otherwise,
Yeah,
there is no.
and I think the sense that I got from this, I have not read anything to suggest this is the case, but it was almost like Eggers as a writer director has so much reverence and respect for the original, he wasn't going to stray too far,
Yeah.
probably, which is fine. That's fine.
Yes.
As long as you're doing something to make your movie stand out and be worthwhile, which I think visually that's the biggest piece
Yes, I
for
agree. I
me.
think visually, I think acting wise, I feel like there were just enough well known actors that it felt, I enjoyed watching it and I enjoyed their performances, but it didn't feel overshadowed. Sometimes I feel like when you cast such big name celebrities, especially in a period piece like that, it's
Yeah,
hard to separate them. And I didn't feel like that was the case in this. I enjoyed all of the actors.
because it's what is it? Nicholas Holt? How do you say his
Yes,
name? I don't know if I'm
I
saying it
love
correctly.
him.
And then I could not remember the name of the actor who was his friend who was helping watch out for
I don't
his
know. I
wife.
don't know. I couldn't place that person.
I wanted to say it was the same guy that was in Bullet Train. Did you see Bullet Train?
No.
I don't know if you've seen that. It was Aaron Taylor Johnson. Looking at his IMDb credits, he was in Nocturnal Animals, Kick Ass. What else was he in Bullet Train? I really think he was. Yes, he was in Bullet Train. I was not making that up. Okay, it was the same guy. Um, so anyway, okay, one more thing that I wanted to highlight and just talk about briefly was the appearance of Orlok, uh, Nosferatu as a character. So he's got a
Yeah.
mustache. This is spoiler territory, obviously, but he's got a mustache in
I
this, and he's
mean,
got
it's
kind
not
of
going to
some.
kill the story for you, but yes,
It's not
surprise.
going to kill the story. I
Mustache.
so I'm not going to say that his appearance, especially, I don't know what it was about the mustache specifically, but it almost made me laugh.
Yes, it
It
is.
didn't,
It is.
and I
Yes.
don't think that was the intent
I
necessarily.
hope not.
Yeah.
And
So
I feel like they were trying to make him look like this Eastern European general guy who in real life probably, like they said, sold his soul to the devil however centuries ago. Like he looked historically like someone I would expect to see in human form,
yeah,
who sold their soul to become the undead. He didn't so much have the undead aesthetic, and definitely not the undead aesthetic that we are used to as a vampire. And then even when you see him naked and such, it's very creature like, which I
yeah.
like that element.
No, and I like the way he drinks blood. It's like gulping and like very animalistic
There is
kind of stuff.
nothing sexy about this vampire.
Yeah,
However, and this is what I liked, there is a level of sexualization.
Mhm.
And so I liked that because to me it made it that much more grotesque. That
Yeah.
like as an objector looking at this, like, ugh, nothing about that is enthralling. But the people in the film are enthralled and attached because of the connection. And I believed it because of what they portrayed.
Yeah, so the only thing I would add or talk about briefly is just Willem Dafoe. I just thought he was great because I mean
I
he's
love
great
him.
in everything essentially. And I saw earlier on Twitter, I was kind of scrolling, and apparently Robert Eggers has offered Dafoe roles in his next two movies, which I mean is fine. He was in the Northman, I think briefly, wasn't he? Like early on, like whenever Ethan Hawke is still alive, like early in that movie, he's like his
Really?
shaman or like a guy, like he's in
Was
there
that
early
him?
on. Yeah, I think if I'm remembering correctly, I think that's right. Now I got to double check. I'm pretty sure.
I mean, I know he
So
was in the
we'll see.
lighthouse.
Yeah, and that. Yeah.
Which
So you have
I
not
did
seen
not again,
that?
I did not see, but I know he was in that. His character was probably my favorite character in the movie.
Yeah. The lighthouse is visually again very amazing, like this movie, but narratively it's kind of all over the place and a little bit opaque. It's more interesting than I would have expected, but yeah, Willem Dafoe is in it. Yeah, I'm looking now. He was in the Northman. Yeah. So
Okay.
anyway, okay, so I guess we'll wrap this up. So, any final thoughts on Nosferatu that we should add here?
I mean, I definitely think it's worth seeing, and I would say it's worth seeing in a theater because why not?
Yeah, yeah,
Especially on the big screen. I don't think you'd have to wait for it to be on streaming in order to watch it. And honestly, because of the visual elements, it might be more enjoyable in this giant dark room where those elements are sort of highlighted for you.
yeah. I would. I mean, I think if you've got any interest in Robert Eggers' work, I mean, you like his other movies, you've got any interest in vampires, and you want to just see kind of a new. I don't even know if it's new, but another person's take on Nosferatu as a character is totally worth seeing for sure. Just
Yeah.
don't expect anything all that revolutionary from a storytelling perspective. Is all I would sort of
No.
say
And
in
I would
addition to
also
that.
say if you don't typically like his films, like you didn't like The Witch and you didn't like The Northman, I think this is still worth seeing because, like you said, it is more mainstream
Yeah.
than the other, more digestible. Still going to be pretty grotesque at parts, lots of blood and things like that. Nothing like violent. Like I don't think anybody gets their
The
head ripped off, but
the the part that I'm still remembering now, so there were 2 things that were funny. The quote from Willem Dafoe, I know you had it down pretty what was the quote he said exactly?
I've seen things that would make Isaac Newton crawl back into his mother's womb.
And he delivers it with such seriousness,
Oh
which
my
is so
god,
hilarious.
yes.
And then the scene where Knock bites off the pigeon's head, and then the
Oh,
doctor
yeah.
behind him goes, "My good sir, why would you do that?"
Yes, why would you do that?
It's just like this
But like
horribly grotesque act. Why would you do that? Just very
but
matter of
like,
fact.
as a psychologist, I understand you're not trying to shame your patient. You're why would you do that? Explain to me why you would make that choice.
Yeah.
That's what's going on.
So I think that's kind of the long and short of
Yeah.
Nosferatu. We'll be back soon. I don't know what other movie we've got on the
You still wanna see
horizon.
Night Bitch.
Night Bitch, yes, Amy Adams. We will see that soonish,
Okay, I hope.
probably, and do a review.
Yeah.
And I know Kim is going to watch Ready or Not soon. Maybe we'll do a review of that
Yes, I am.
once
Yes,
it's
I
watched.
am.
So
I'm gonna
anyway,
watch
thanks
tomorrow.
for watching, and we will check back in soon.